Okay. All right. Welcome everybody back to the second half of our second annual program, Coping and Building Resilience in Challenging Times, and sponsored by Marcia and Michael Lax. Want to thank them again. And it's a pleasure to welcome Sherri Mandell to our motion and to the program. Sherri's received the National Jewish Book Award for her memoir, The Blessings of a Broken Heart. Of course, the loss of her son killed in a terrorist attack. And she's also the author, as was just mentioned, as one of the primary books, The Road to Resilience, which was just translated or into Hebrew this year. She is the co-founder of the Kobe Mandell Foundation, which for the past 23 years has been running healing groups and camps for bereaved families and children in Israel. And of course, have much to do after October 7th. She is a certified pastoral counselor for facilitating groups and speaking about grief, resilience, and healing. And we look forward to learning with you. Thank you, Sherri.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me. If anybody wants to put on their screen, it would be great because I really like to talk to people. And so thank you. Yeah, anybody who can put on your screen. So what I'm going to do today is talk about the spiritual steps of resilience. As Rabbi Kelman said, my son Kobe was murdered almost 24 years ago. He was 13, and some of you probably know that he was murdered, he and his friend Yosef Ishran. They went hiking in the wadi, in the canyon near our home, and they were beat to death with rocks by terrorists. So when people say October 7th was a wake-up call, part of me, of course, says, of course, but part of me says, not really, if you look at Jewish history, and especially Israeli history, that the cruelty isn't something new. So the question is, how does somebody like myself or my husband or my family or all the victims from the Intifada, the victims' families, and all the victims now and the soldiers' parents and the Nova survivors' Nova people who were killed during the Nova, how do we find resilience? And, during the break, I was thinking about it, like, what's the message I want to leave you in one sentence? And it was really hard for me to figure it out. But when I was thinking about it, I thought the real message is that resilience is also being not resilient. Like, there's nobody who's resilient all the time. And there's nobody who's resilient in every way. And resilience is something we have to keep learning and building. And also, it's sort of a catchword. So I felt like I wanted to write my book. Here it is, The Road to Resilience. I wanted to write it because I felt like resilience was really misunderstood. And, I was lucky to hear Dr. Pelkowitz and his daughter. But so I'm not sure how much definition people have given in the seminar. I'm sure they have. But for me, resilience, I mean, it comes from the root of resalir from the Latin, which is sort of to leap back, to bounce. It's sort of like the meaning of bouncing back and to be like who you were before after a tragedy. And I feel like that meaning is a kind of weak meaning because if you've gone through trauma, you can't be who you were before, at least most people. Because when you're shattered, you need to rebuild. And like, especially, I can talk for myself, I wasn't big enough to hold what I needed to hold. So I had to become somebody bigger, somebody greater. And I think that that's the real definition of resilience, is to become greater as a result of your pain. When after Kobe was killed, like a month later, I picked up a hitchhiker in Toccoa. And I remember I was talking to him and I said, he knew who I was. And I said, you know, people always tell me to be strong. Can you hear me, by the way? You can hear
We,
okay.
we hear you
Okay.
fine. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
probably your computer has volume things you can raise up. Yeah, but we hear you
Yeah,
fine.
no, okay. So they said people always tell you to be strong. And in fact, whenever I speak, I tell this story that people always tell you to be strong. And I always felt like, why be strong? Like I was crying, I was broken, I was crushed. Why should I be strong? Like there was no point in being strong. And this 15-year-old boy, he said to me, no, don't be strong. Guard your strength, protect your strength. And I felt like that was a much better definition for me of, of maybe not resilience, but how to build resilience. Like be yourself, be authentic. Like I think that one of the gifts of trauma is really that you lose your defenses. And so, in a way, I mean, I'm talking for myself, but a lot of people have told me this too. Because through our foundation, I've worked with, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of people. And one of the gifts of trauma is that you have to be, at least I did, I had to be who I was. I couldn't fake anything. And also, you're forced to change, right? Like so many people want to change. They go to meditate and you go to India. I mean, I went to India too, but like people are, they're desperate for change. And it's unfortunate that often change comes from the worst circumstances. In fact, when I speak, we run a lot of groups for bereaved mothers and widows and bereaved couples. And when I used to speak to bereaved mothers, I would say, you know, after Kobe was killed, I really wanted to die. Like it was just the pain was too much. And I think that that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand, that emotional pain can be so unbearable that you really think that you're not going to be able to take it. You want to die. And another bereaved mother told me this too, that she wanted to die. And she said, but you don't die. Grief doesn't kill you. And, but it's not true, because I was talking about this at one of our mothers groups after October 7th. And one of the mothers came up to me. She is the mother of a soldier who was killed. And she told me the Shabbos after he was killed, 10 days later, it was supposed to be her other son's wedding. And they had postponed the wedding, but the other family came. And so they were having a little bit of a celebration on Shabbat. And this bereaved mother went up to her, she started not feeling well, and she went up to her room. And luckily, her husband came and looked for her to see what was going on. And she was having problems breathing. And they called an ambulance, and she went to the hospital, and she had had a heart attack from the grief. And it's something called broken-hearted syndrome. And it's something that's happened quite a few times since in Israel since October 7th. So this is serious stuff, you know, like that we're going through. Just last week, one of the fathers from his daughter had been killed at the Nova Festival, and he killed himself. So the grief and the trauma, you know, they have a lot of collateral damage, and you can get sick and you can even die from grief. So there is a great need for resilience. So I came up through my experience and my experience working with the mothers of the Kobe Mandell Foundation and the children, I came up with 7 stages of resilience that I thought were like more spiritual and more appropriate really in a Jewish way. Because in Judaism, we never just want to go back to who we were. We're always trying to become more and better and bigger. So the first stage of resilience, as I see it, all the stages start with C. So maybe I'll just read you the stages because we probably won't get to all of them, but they all start with C, and I'll just read them off to you now. And then I'll talk about a few of them. The first stage is chaos, and then community. The next stage is choice. The next stage is creativity, then commemoration, consecration, and celebration. So it's chaos, community, choice, creativity, commemoration, consecration, and celebration. So chaos. Chaos really is the first step, unfortunately, in creation, right? Even in the Bereshit story, we start with tohu and vohu. We start with chaos and desolation. And there's no creativity. Like, God doesn't create the world from creation. He creates the world from chaos. And chaos is unbearable, right? Like, and I think of October 7th and the people in the Gaza envelope and what they went through and how the army didn't arrive. The army did not show up. And they were left, you know a lot of these stories. I'm not going to get into the stories because part of resilience for me is protecting myself. And maybe for a lot of you too. And a lot of the bereaved mothers I speak to, when I tell them, you have to protect yourself, because from hearing all the details of the stories, because it's not always healthy for us to enter that chaos. But there's no creation without chaos. And there are different degrees of chaos, because like on October 7th in Israel, in Simchat Torah, when I went to the synagogue, to the Beit Knesset, like when I got there, I didn't even know anything had happened yet. And slowly, news started filtering in. And then my daughter told me, she also lives where I live, and she has 4 little kids, and her husband was in synagogue. He was supposed to be the chazan, the cantor, and all of a sudden he left the Beit Knesset, he left synagogue, he left his 4 kids and his wife there. He went home, he got his phone, he found out that he was called up, he got in his uniform, and he went back to the synagogue and hugged his children goodbye. And also in my shul, in my Beit Knesset, in my synagogue, the same thing was going on. And my daughter later told me she felt like she was in a movie from Yom Kippur, from the Yom Kippur War, because she had heard about that, about the soldiers just leaving from synagogue. But there was this feeling of not knowing and of chaos. And we were, 150 kilometers from the border at least. So we weren't directly involved, but I think that the chaos of that day has not gone away, and all the trauma and the destruction. So the next stage is the next C is community, which is really kindness. And in Israel was really incredible, because the government was a little bit slow in figuring out what to do. But the people, the community of Israel, they rushed in to fill all these gaps. And like soldiers rushed in from their homes they just would grab a gun. Some of them went without guns, and they rushed in, and they were the people who tried to save the communities. And some of them succeeded, some of them were killed, but there was this kind of heroism from the community, and also kindness. that is still going on. There are so many, our organization has been around for almost 24 years, but a lot of organizations sprung up, like from there was a whole shift, the judicial, we had that big fight over judicial reform that was tearing the country apart. But a lot of the people who were in the judicial reform organization, they pivoted to go help the people in the Gaza envelope. And I can say for myself, after my son was murdered, that the amount of kindness and community that we found was stunning. Like, I had no idea people were so kind. Thank God, because I hadn't needed it. And also, I didn't grow up religious. I didn't grow up with the community. It wasn't like part of my DNA. It wasn't part of my life experience. And so to be broken like we were, to be so needy and to have people come in, I described it as it was if I was drowning every day and somebody came in with a raft to lift us up, because the the trauma is just, it's indescribable. It really is, and the pain. So, and there's different levels of kindness. Like, we work with a family, their son was at the Nova Festival. He was working there, and then he disappeared at the festival, right? They didn't know what had happened to him. And they were hoping that he had been kidnapped, but they didn't know. And they had heard no word of him. And eventually they found his phone. They found something. The army found pieces of his phone near the border of Israel. And they figured out that most likely he hadn't been kidnapped, but they couldn't find his body. And eventually they disinterred bodies from October 7th, from the festival, and they found his DNA, parts of his body, in another grave, which is such a really gruesome story. But the family described it to me as a chesed, as a kindness, because they knew he was dead. And that kind of kindness is such a painful kindness, right? It's also the kindness of returning the bodies of the hostages. There's something so painful about it, but there's still chesed, there's still kindness involved in it. Then choice. Choice, I didn't really understand how important choice was until October 7th, because my book, it was translated into Hebrew. I don't think, you can't really see because it's blurred. It's called Bechazara de Chaim. And Irit Chaim wrote the introduction for it. And Iris Chaim, she is the mother of Yotam, who was kidnapped. He was taken hostage in Gaza. And he was one of those three men. It was a terrible day. It was one of the worst days of the war, when our army, by accident, shot the three hostages. And her son, Yotam, was killed. And she has gone on to become a heroine of this country. Because I'll read you what she wrote she wrote this to the soldiers who killed her son. She recorded it, a WhatsApp to the soldiers. I am Yotam's mother, she said. I wanted to tell you that I love you very much, and I hug you here from afar. It makes me want to cry. It's like so heartbreaking. I know that everything that happened is absolutely not your fault, and nobody's fault except that of Hamas May their name be wiped out and their memory erased from the earth. Very appropriate after the Parsha we just had with Amalek. I want you to look after yourselves and to think all the time that you are doing the best thing in the world. Nobody's going to judge you or be angry. Not me, and not my husband Raviv, not my daughter Noya, and not Yotam, may his memory be blessed, and not Tuval, Yotam's brother. We love you very much. Oh my God, when I read that, it's so devastating. But that choice she made to tell the soldiers that she loves them, and then she made another choice that I read about in the newspaper. She said that she could have seen Yotam as a victim and only seen the nightmare of his situation. But the fact that he had run out from hiding meant to her that he had died free, that he had been a free person. And that was how she chose to see him. And for me, hearing that, because, Kobe and Yosef, they were little boys. I mean, they were only 13 and 14. And they were beaten to death, in the canyon. There's nobody there. And I could never see anything to spin it into something more positive. But once she talked about that freedom, that her son had died free, I felt like she gave me permission also to say that my son, that he died free and he died in beauty and he died like having fun. And that she gave me the ability to choose to see it in a more positive way. And, that's the one thing we have on this earth is choice, is free choice. And like earlier, we were talking about gratitude and that choice to be grateful. But it's also the choice to frame things, but sometimes we can't do it ourselves. That's the thing. We need the community. We need other people to help us. Like I needed Iris Haim to help me reframe it. And for me, that's almost like hashgacha pratit. It's almost like divine intervention. And sort of believing that we'll find our way, even when things are most bleak. We'll find our way because other people are there to hold us when we can't hold ourselves. Okay, the next C is creativity. And for me, creativity was a big deal and is a big deal because I've always been a writer. And that's always how I've made sense of the world, is by writing. And creativity, it gives coherence to the chaos. I'm going to say that again because I think it's really important that creativity gives coherence. It's a way of giving coherence to chaos. And like one woman I worked with, I spoke to the bereaved couples, after October 7th, and I mentioned my book, and this woman was in touch with me, one of the bereaved mothers, and she said, yeah, creativity is fine for you because you're a writer. But I said to her, I knew that she was an art teacher. And I said, you teach art, like there's so much you can do. You definitely have your own way with creativity. And I think every single person has their own creative avenue. And it doesn't have to be like art or music or drama. And you don't have to be talented. It can also be like making a lemon pie. Or after Kobe was killed, my kids and I, one day I was like, I keep wanting to say ala panim, which is Hebrew for really, really in bad shape. And it just came to me. I gave my kids pots and pans, and I gave them forks and big wooden spoons, and we just marched around the house hitting these pots and like shouting. And it really released something. So creativity is a way of, I think, like meeting God in a way, because God is creative, right? That's one of his main attributes, if not his main attribute, right? Like, I mean, he created the world, so, and we say that he's constantly creating. So when we create, we're sort of partnering with him. And like my book, it's called The Blessing of a Broken Heart. It's divided into two sections. And one section is the cave, because Kobe and Yosef were killed in a cave. And of course, a cave is a place of darkness and a place where you're sort of stuck. And like they were near where we live, there are a lot of caves, and they're caves from the 5th century. And there's this huge cave called Haritun, which is like the biggest cave in the Middle East. And when you're in that cave, it has 100 rooms. You cannot find your way out of that cave by yourself. The second part of my book, though, is called The Bird's Nest, because I had a lot of stories with birds and birds' nests after Kobe was killed. And the bird's nest is the opposite. It's the opposite image of the cave. Because while the cave is closed and dark and hard to get out of, and for me, a place of death, because Kobe and Yosef were killed in a cave, the bird's nest is a place of light and a place that's open and a place of birth. So finding the right images, I mean, those images were given to me, but finding the right images, not that it solved everything. It's not like, oh, okay, now everything's fine. But also, I found out a midrash about the bird's nest, that the bird's nest, it's a Kabbalistic concept, that the bird's nest is the highest, most holy place in the world. And there's something called the supernal bird's nest. And in that bird's nest, there are pictures of the first and second temple and pictures of all the children who died Kiddush Hashem, pictures of all the children who died sanctifying God's name. So, like, that's like crazy, a crazy revelation. Like I can't feel you when I'm speaking, so it's really hard because I need your energy. You know what I mean? To say, wow, wow, like, whoa, because it really is like what I'm telling. Thank you, Mark. Thank you. I need it. I'm very interactive, so anyway, but that creativity, it's not like it's going to save you. Nothing saves you, right? It's like Hashem saves you. Only God saves you. But there's a process that you have to also be ready in a way for God to save you and for you to be able to see God's kindness. Because even in the midst of the worst SHIT, excuse my language, there's also God's kindness. And you're like, what? No, this can't be. But yes, it's there. It's like, I think that's what I started with, like that, saying resilience is like both. You're going to be resilient and not resilient. You're going to be in hell, but you're also going to be in heaven at the same time, because God is going to be with you and people are going to be with you. And the world is going to open in a way that you never felt before, because you weren't broken open. Like you can be broken and then you can be broken open. You can have a breakdown or you can have a breakthrough. And for me, a lot of it was that, first of all, I have a great family, but also I had people around me who just were not going to let me drown. So, oh yeah, commemoration. there's something I want to show you because I've spoken about commemoration for a long time. It's the way we remember. And in Judaism, we're always remembering, right? Like every Shabbat, we're remembering going out of Egypt and we're remembering the portion of the Torah of that week and every holiday. And I mean, on Shabbat, we just remembered Amalek in order to forget him, right? Which I can't figure that out, but I think that it has to do with that both, in Hebrew, the gam v'gam. It's both. So there's this professor, his name is Dr. Duke, and his wife is a psychologist, and she found that after 9/11, she noticed that the children who knew a lot about their family stories, that they were more resilient. And he tested this. He made a survey. It was called the Do You Know survey. And it was like they asked children, like, do you know where your parents met? Do you know where your grandparents were from? Do you know what your what your grandfather did for a job? Do you know anything bad that happened in your family? And the kids who knew the most were the most resilient. So there's something about remembering and knowing your past, knowing your history. And I think that because we're Jews, that we are so involved in learning about our, spirit, like Judaism, which is really our spiritual history. Like the whole Torah is really our history, our national history. And then all the Chagim, all the holidays, they're always remembering. And I think that's what gives us our resilience, is that we know a lot. And we know that this isn't the first time that the Jews have had to face anti-Semitism. I mean, in America and Canada, of course, it feels like the first time. But, I know in America, it's not the first time. Anyway, so I was going to show you a picture because during the war, somebody sent me this picture. I don't think you'll be able to see it. Maybe I'll unblur. Can I unblur?
If you want, you can share your screen. I don't know if that will help, but may not really.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
not going to blur for a second. Yeah, then you can see. What it says is Lezichro Kobe Mandell. Can anybody guess where this is? Well, I'll just tell you. It's in
Isn't that in
Gaza.
Hebron or yeah?
It's
No,
in
Gaza.
Gaza.
That's
It's
right.
graffiti on a wall in Gaza that somebody wrote. Now, who wrote this? We left Silver Spring when Kobe was in 4th grade. And Kobe had a friend named Zanvi then. And Zanvi had an older sister who got married. She moved to Israel. And, 20 years later, her son was a soldier. And her son did the graffiti in Gaza, like spray painted in memory of Kobe. And for me, I know some people may think it's not, it's defacing or disgracing, but for me, it was like, oh my God, I felt like it was like my vengeance, that somebody remembered, like it's 20 years, Kobe's murders like a generation ago. And to see this and to have it sent to me, it was a kind of comfort because it's also like, it's the right address, right? It's like terrorists who are being told to remember Kobe. But it was also that he was remembered. This isn't his war. He's been gone for so long, but he was remembered. And in that remembering, there was something like healing for me and something changed, and it's like, it's an ongoing story. And we're really all part of this ongoing story. In narrative therapy, I was like very lucky because I studied with Michael White, and he's the person that created narrative therapy. He's Australian. He died a few years ago, but he came and he did a 2-day workshop in Tel Aviv. And he taught about narrative therapy, and he said that the goal of narrative therapy was for people to see that they were part of a bigger story, right? To transfer or transform their own little story to something bigger. And that's what we're always doing as Jews, right? We're taking our little story and expanding it to be part of the national story. Okay. Oh, consecration. Consecration is when, it has the word in it, sacred. You consecration, to make something sacred. And anytime you take something that's really bad and you turn it into good, then in a way you're consecrating God's name, because where you could sort of say, I'm finished with God, instead you're saying that you can still bless God because you have found a way to do a tikkun. And I'll give you an example. Like for us, we run a camp. We've been running a camp for bereaved children for 23 years, Camp Kobe. And why did we choose to do a camp? Because Kobe was a kid. Kobe loved having fun. He was good at sports. And also, we felt like Kobe and Yosef, they were killed in such a cruel way that all we could do was try to take all that pain, and especially the cruelty, and transform it into kindness. So the fact that we could take all that cruelty and transform it into kindness, it's a way, I think it's just like a huge tikkun, a huge healing, and a way of still being able to love God, really, to love God, because otherwise you would just be like, I'm mad, in Hebrew, brogus, like you're just fed up. But I think that's the thing with consecration and with remembering things. When they come from a deep place and you do a healing in a deep way, then it brings some kind of big light into the world, like that is beyond you. It's almost beyond the individual. It's something greater. It's like you hook into something infinite. Like my machatanister, he's a big rabbi, and when we were doing the wedding and we were planning the wedding for our kids, he said to me, "Don't plan everything. You have to leave some room for God to do something." So when you're really broken, it's like there's a lot of room for God to come in, because there's so many places where you need fixing, where you need things fixed. Okay, and then the last one is celebration. The last C is celebration. And we see with our children at camp that most people would think that the kids at camp are really sad and really down, but it's unbelievable what happens, because when they are with each other, they are so happy that the happiness is greater than ordinary happiness. In fact, today I just found out 2 kids from camp got engaged. I mean, they're not kids anymore, but because they're understood there. These kids, they carry a secret. When you're a bereaved child, it's like you carry a secret. You don't want to tell people, at least like my kids. Maybe this generation is different, but kids want to feel like they're like everybody else. So when they're at Camp Kobe, they are like everybody else. And it's ironic because they do get to share their stories, but it's the only place where the story doesn't control them, because it doesn't sit on them like a secret. I went to see Eden Reichel. He's an Israeli singer. He's a phenomenal singer, Eden Reichel. If you've never heard him, you should listen to him. And he was playing in the National Library in Jerusalem. And it was the day of the funeral of the Bibas family. So it was the day of the funeral of the children and the mother. And it was in Israel, it was such a hard, bad, that whole week was like such a terrible week. I feel like in Israel, it was almost like it was a national mourning all week. And that it wasn't even that you had to connect to it. It was like an inescapable kind of feeling of family. But he had the concert that night, and he said, "We live in a great country." He said to the audience, "We live in a great country. Why do we live in a great country? Because we decide it's great." And I think that was like he gave permission to all of us to be happy. And what's so unbelievable is that Israel is one of, the happiest countries in the world. And I like, why? And I think it has to do with probably what Dr. Pelkowitz said, and what probably most of the speakers said, is that happiness and resilience, that they have to do with meaning, with finding a meaning and finding purpose. And I think as Jews, we have just this really strong feeling, especially now, of purpose and meaning and connection, right? Connection to the history and connection to what happened on October 7th, connection to the victims, connection to the survivors, connection to standing up for ourselves, connecting to students on campus who were trying to defend us, and connecting to the soldiers who are protecting us, and connecting to the land of Israel, which is more and more the only place where Jews can, I would say, be free of anti-Semitism, but it's not exactly true. I just want to close with one thing that somebody told me last week. So I was talking to a friend, and her husband is Rabbi Breitowitz. He's a rabbi. He was originally from Silver Spring, where we lived, and he was actually one of my son's the Sandak for his brit, for my son Gavi. And so his wife told me that Rabbi Breitowitz, he was talking to somebody. Well, I said to her, to the wife, Sally, I said, I think that Rabbi Breitowitz is a great rabbi because he understands suffering, right? And she said that he was talking to somebody had come to him with a problem. And she said that her friends wanted her to be okay. And like, I see this all the time when I work with families from October 7th, and especially from the Nova Festival, because it's been over a year. The friends of the bereaved mothers, they want them to be back to who they were, and they'll never come back to who they were, and they want them to be okay. And Rabbi Breitowitz said to this woman, if it's a very dark room and you light a candle, then even a little candle will make a lot of light. So she said this, and I was like, yeah, you know what? I've heard this, and yeah, it's true, but it's kind of a cliche. But she went on, and she said that Rabbi Breitowitz said, but in the corners of the room, there's always going to be darkness. And I think knowing that and accepting that is really the deepest part of resilience. Just knowing that those corners are always going to be dark. And it doesn't matter what you do, how many candles you light. So you're going to have to find a way to live with that darkness. But the darkness doesn't overwhelm the room, and we see that in Jewish history, that we have gone through such horrible darkness in so many periods, but we have never let that darkness obscure light. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that moving and powerful talk. Anybody have a 30 seconds for any comments or just to say thank you, I guess is
Thank you. It's amazing. You're amazing. All the best to you.
I mean,
Thank you.
okay.